What would the Taliban look like in the United States? And I don't mean how we envision the Taliban with long robes and turbans, but the American version. A group of men who have been granted what seems like unlimited power to recreate laws based on religious ideologies that they have decided the entire world should be following. Men deciding that they have the power to decide about the levels of women's bodily autonomy or what they should wear or how what they wear is defined through God's vision. Men that insist that modern culture has moved us too far away from the divine. And these men promising that all that they really want to do is return the world to God's original design and plan. Would Americans actually ever vote for brown men wearing long beards and robes who promise to bring the entire country closer to God? Absolutely not. Of course not. It's not even a question. That wouldn't even be a thing, right? But what if we change what they look like? What if we put them in suits and they change their language a bit? And what if they used language of patriotism instead of piety? And they wrapped religious authority in something that Americans feel far more attached to, like capitalism and nationalism. The ideology doesn't change, just the aesthetic. The ideologies all of a sudden become respectable, electable, followable. And if you gave that movement, those men, a name, not Taliban, but evangelical, and then suddenly millions of Americans somehow don't see it as extremism. Suddenly they feel like salvation has actually arrived. And if you look closely enough, this is where Western narrative about religion starts to unravel, because the difference between religious extremism and traditional values has everything to do with who is telling the story and not religious ideology. If you haven't already, go ahead, subscribe to my channel, and let's get into my notes on how the West purposefully uses misunderstanding of Islam to be politically useful. There is something we don't talk often enough about. Before 2001, 9/11, most of the West really didn't know very much about Islam or Muslims. It is something that existed, of course, but very vaguely in the mind of Western Christians. Before 2001 to 9/11 happened, people really didn't have much of an opinion on Muslims. But then the towers fell. And overnight, within an instant, Islam became not so much a religion, but an ideology against Western values. Angry men, covered women, explosions. This is something that has been imprinted on us since 9/11. There have been terror attacks, all associated with Islamic extremists. Islamic extremists has become the euphemism for Muslims. Even in the narrative attempt or the idea that separates extreme Muslims from the regular Muslims, keeps in mind a certain narrative. You just can't tell the difference. The news cycles that repeated the same language, Muslim extremists, with the visuals of explosions, did something very particular to Western mentality. It created the idea that Muslim equates to danger. And even if they are extremists, they're still Muslim with the same base beliefs. And this works not because it was true, but because it is a very simple idea. And now, if you were born after 2001, after 9/11, you are being raised with the idea that Muslims are just this one thing. The continued war in religion has gone past the Crusades and has been primarily associated with consciousness, memory, and emotion. We can all understand that Christianity is complicated. We know that Catholics are not Baptists. We know that evangelicals are not Anglicans. We understand that there are progressive Christians and people who are fundamentalist Christians, and they don't exist in the same spaces. People in the West understand that Christianity does not exist in a silo, and that one group cannot represent the entire religion. But with Islam, we pretty much just say Muslims, and that pretty much only means the Taliban. The Taliban has become this symbol of Islam, no matter where it is practiced or how. We have erased cultures from Indonesia, Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, where the Sunni Muslims, who are often the ones associated with global terror, actually come from. But Morocco, Bosnia, Islam is practiced all around the world. And it is just as different and just as complex as Christianity. But we in the West do what we do with things that are different. We have flattened entirely different societies into one ideological caricature. So if we imagine that the entire understanding of Christianity comes from, say, the current evangelicals who are running the United States government, then all Christianity would be bad. But that is the intellectual framework that Muslims are dealing with every day. Western media has nothing to dispel the fact that Islam is not one unified religious structure. And the largest historical divide is actually between the Sunni Muslims, the ones I mentioned before that cause terror, and the Shia Muslims, who the United States just killed their Ayatollah. Sunni Muslims generally operate with decentralized authority, which means that their local scholars are the ones who interpret religious laws. And different interpretations based on locality and based on history can all be different. But Shia Muslims look very different and behave very differently. Their structure is far more like the Catholic Church. Religious scholars are trained, and there is a structure and a hierarchy within their religious structure, the Ayatollah being at the top of said structure, kind of like a Catholic pope. This lack of knowledge isn't by accident, because familiarity only complicates propaganda. If Christians in the West knew that Shia Muslims are allowed to have sex before marriage, what would that mean to the narrative about control and oppression of Muslim women? The Ayatollah has made lots of statements about women. You rarely hear Muslims talk about women like this.
پیغمبر می‌فرماید المرأة ریحانة، ریحانه یعنی گل، زن در خانه گله و لیست به قهرمانه، کارگزار و خونه نیست. شما بگید چرا این کارو نکردی، چرا اون کارو نکردی، چرا خونه تمیز نیست، لیست به قهرمانه. ریحانتون گله، گلو باید مراقبت کرد، باید حفظ کرد. او هم شما رو از رنگ خود، از بوی خود، از خواص خود برخوردار کنید.
Instead, the West prefers to keep one narrative in mind when it comes to the Islamic religion: extremism and oppression, even though they don't seem to have that problem when it's associated with Christian values.
Women are the kind of people that people come out of.
Wives, submit to your husbands in everything. Everything is what the Bible teaches. And it is a sense of fear and trembling, and awe is the disposition of deference that the wife is to maintain towards her husband as she seeks to submit to him as the church submits to Christ, not only in things she agrees with, but in everything. She belongs to him. He owns her.
Our study of religion in the West is very limited to Christian ideology, which means that you do not find the similarities across different ways of believing in other religions. The mysticism that exists when we talk about Christian monks exists almost identically in Islam. The people like monks who withdraw from society to pursue spiritual experiences and enlightenment are just like the Sufi Muslims within Islam. They write poetry, they write music, and they're pacifists. Their whole ideology is about meditative practices and experiencing divine love. Some of the most celebrated spiritual literature actually comes from Sufi Muslims. If Western audiences were ever exposed to some of the poetry and music by Sufi Muslims without the idea of Islam, they would probably see it as profoundly spiritual. But somehow the word Muslim enters the conversation and imagination stops because the narrative around Islam has already been created, embedded, and accepted. And nothing about beauty is associated with the Islamic religion within Western narrative. And this is not just in the United States. The misunderstanding is not by accident globally. Europe has spent centuries framing Muslims as uncivilized and backwards. They justify colonial expansion as a moral mission, creating the first narrative that the spread of Christian civilization was bringing enlightenment to the Orient. Religion has always been a type of narrative armor for empire. Economic expansion in what's now the Middle East has been reframed as a moral intervention. Political control and interference was reframed as some sort of cultural rescue. These narratives did not disappear after colonialism. They simply evolved. A monolithic Islam is politically convenient. Making Islam inherently dangerous makes military intervention constantly justifiable. You don't have to explain that these interventions are really about oil politics. If you invoke the word Muslim that you have already equated with terror, then the Western imagination fills in the rest. Simplifying your enemies in this way in public imagination removes the need for complicated explanations. Because how does the West, with its moral superiority, explain that every oppressive religious regime in the Middle East was appointed and approved by Western forces in an effort to expand colonial interests and capitalism? Yes. Come here. What is it? What do you want? Oh, thank you. I love a hug from you. Thank you. Can I finish my video? I'm almost done. And then you can come out on the terrace, okay? Can you let me finish though? The West doesn't have to explain that it has funded every terrorist group that has committed global crimes around the world in an effort to maintain access to oil. Because Westerners, we can understand contradictions within Christianity for whatever reason. We understand that there are Christians who are liberal or socialist as well as conservative. And now that Christian nationalism is in charge in the United States, people can still justify and redefine what freedom looks like to fit with inside Christian ideological limitations. The narrative that has been created in the West does not allow for most Westerners to look at Islam with any type of curiosity. Instead, Islam is automatically defined with a narrative that it is the enemy of civilization. This misunderstanding is not by accident. It serves political functions. It allows for geopolitics to live simply in Westerners' minds. It reinforces Western moral superiority. It has evolved modern military interventions and wars into humanitarian efforts. The West has created a narrative around war in the Middle East as a moral duty. Every time someone says that the West misunderstands Islam, the problem always is being associated with ignorance. And the thing about ignorance is ignorance can be corrected, but narratives generally aren't. The misunderstanding itself is doing most of the work. And it has been doing its work for centuries to justify wars. It justifies certain strange alliances. It justifies surveillance. And it justifies the irony that the West killed the Ayatollah, who was the leader of the Shia Muslims, who actually aligned far more with Western values and freedom than any of the evangelical Christians that are leading the United States right now. Shows how ignorance can be weaponized within a culture. So much so that they don't even know who they are anymore, but they think that they know who everyone else really is. It's an irony that for me has been long hard to ignore, that the religion that has given us the Crusades, Inquisition, colonial missions, and centuries of religious warfare are now presenting themselves as the rational referees of global religion. And somehow the narrative within the West has yet to change. Somehow our inability to look critically at Christianity as one of the most extremist religions that exist proves how easily the West itself is absolutely no different than the narrative that has been created and invented about other cultures, other religions, and other people around the world. It seems funny to think that suddenly that these people with their history in Christianity have somehow become the experts on extremism without being extremists. But I guess that history is just funny that way. If you haven't already, go ahead, subscribe to my channel. I look forward to having this discussion with you in the comments, so ciao, ciao for now.